Good morning. Good morning. For Louisiana versus all y'all, I'm Jerit Roser. He's Chance Hester of Louisiana Football Report. And just like we did last week, kind of taking a look around the state at some of these playoff outcomes. Round two, the bulk of the action taking place Friday night. We had a game Thursday evening as well that I was out at Estruma and Haynes Academy. But 61 games around the state on Friday night. When you take that one out and the two forfeit dynamics that we'll mention throughout the show. But before we get into bracket by bracket stuff, I guess, Chance, just kind of first thoughts as you look at how some things played out on Friday, and then we'll talk about one that really caught our eye, certainly. But how are you, man? Now 2 weeks into this playoff action, and how you feeling about the way some of your brackets look, and just what are your takeaways 2 weeks in?
I felt a lot better last week than I do this week. But it's really, as bad as my brackets look, it's awesome for high school football in Louisiana that we have a lot of surprise outcomes. Some of these I should have just went with my gut on. I tried to be a little too logical with some of my brackets. For one example, we talked about it for 2 weeks. I just knew Cecilia was going to upset Lutcher, but I didn't put it on paper. Like, I couldn't get past the 2 seed, the machine that Lutcher is, every year, being at home. That's obviously a really tough place to go play. And so I should have had a little bit more faith in old Diesel and his boys getting the job done, but I just didn't put it on paper. But no, a lot of the brackets are really not playing out how we expected, which I think is awesome. You're seeing some schools, like we talked about from the jump in the mid to late teens making these quarterfinal runs. You're seeing some teams like Covenant Christian make their very first trip to Thanksgiving that they've ever had in school history in their short time in the LHSAA. So you're seeing some results that are a bit surprising. There's some teen versus teen quarterfinal matchups, which are pretty awesome, considering that, especially in the smaller brackets, like you and I discussed from the jump, usually in the smaller brackets, those top 8 seeds kind of hold court all the way through. And that's not the case. In Division IV Select alone, you have 3 teams in the teens in the quarterfinals. And so, really, really cool to see some of these teams making runs. Now, some of these are not Cinderellas. It's Southern Lab, Kentwood, OCS. But the way that the brackets fell, it's really not a typical year where the top 8 are just marching on. So it's been some cool results so far. And obviously the biggest one is the one you and I are probably about to talk about, what happened in Scott, Louisiana last night.
No doubt. I honestly – I haven't been overly surprised by a lot just yet, and I'm looking down because I'm trying to tweet out the link for folks on Twitter that want to jump in. I haven't been overly surprised by a lot of it. You and I were kind of tallying last night and this morning where we were in terms of how many of our quarterfinalists we'd picked correctly and how many semifinalists were still alive and whatnot. And I think my number ended up being 52 out of the 64 quarterfinalists I got right. And 2 of those misses are the U-High and Faraday situations that I both had advancing. And then a lot of those other 10 were kind of toss-ups to me that I just, for one reason or another went a different way. And but not altogether surprised at the teams that won the games that they did. I think that John Curtis over Acadiana game that we're about to talk about was the most surprising to me. And we'll get into some of the dynamic of that, because as much as we say that, we probably shouldn't be surprised to hear John Curtis is practicing on Thanksgiving week. They do it every year. It's like the anchorman. It's the pancake breakfast. We do it every month.
Curtis, we do it every month.
Curtis is practicing for quarterfinals every single year for decades now. And so in a lot of ways, that's not surprising in that regard. But I was out at that Lutcher-Cecilia matchup on Friday night. And so folks can kind of catch some of the post-game interviews and whatnot there on the Louisiana versus all y'all channel. I'll have the full game footage up at some point today before I head over to Tiger Stadium for LSU Vandy. But a lot of the situations where lower seeds are advancing, it was lower seeds where you could kind of identify it. the group that you mentioned, where OCS, Kentwood, and Southern Lab were all lower seeds that were as likely to make it through that bracket as anyone in that bracket. And Cecilia and Opelousas, the same thing in Division II non-select. That's two teams that were in the Dome last year and nobody wanted to see. They just, whether it be injuries at different points of the year or playing brutal schedules, they had gone through some ups and downs, but never had any confidence shaken and were ready to go on the road. I asked him about the mentality of it, and he said, we've been talking about it, man. We don't care where we play. We'll head up north or go wherever. We're just road dogs, and we know that we are a team that can make the Dome because we saw that we did it a year ago. Coach Skanes couldn't remember what their seed was. We're probably the most confident 19 seed, 18 seed, whatever the hell we are. We're confident whoever's on the other side of the field that we can match up with them and just have to play our ball. But that Curtis and Acadiana game, we talk about the consistency of Curtis getting to the quarters and beyond every single year and winning state championships almost every time you turn around. This was a Curtis team that was 4-5 at the end of the regular season and is now one of the last 8 standing in this always tough Division I select bracket. While we may be surprised that this 19th seeded Curtis team is making a run, the kids are used to it. JT is there every year. The Curtis family and that staff are there every year, and kids grow up with an expectation of, regardless of what the hell happened, they're going to win some playoff games. When you saw that one played out the way it did, what was your reaction to the Patriots marching on?
I'm pretty sure that the last time John Curtis didn't practice on Thanksgiving, Reagan might have been in office. Honestly, last night we're at Memorial Stadium getting ready to take on East Jeff, and one of our coaches walked up to me and he was like, "Dude, I think Curtis is going to win tonight." And I was like, you know what? I do too. I didn't pick it in my bracket. I'll be honest, I'm not going to lie, and say that I called it. I picked Acadiana to go to the semis. But, the more the game approached, the more I was kind of like, you know what? You don't pick against Belichick, you don't pick against Saban, and you don't pick against JT Curtis. He's the undisputed GOAT of Louisiana high school sports. I should have known better than to ever decide that their seeding didn't live up to their normal standards. And it probably didn't. There were probably times this year where Coach Curtis was a little disappointed with how they were playing. There were probably times where, and there were a lot of those games, how the Catholic League is, you're a graduate of that league. A lot of those games, a 2-7 will beat a 7-2 in a 14-10 type dogfight game, and nobody's surprised by it. So they had some games this year that definitely could have swung their way. They end up with their first losing record since 1969. But man, when the calendar turns to November, it really doesn't matter what their record is or what their seed is. John Curtis is John Curtis. We needed basically every second to beat them last year in a really good quarterfinal game. I think we scored with less than 10 seconds left to win that game. And so it really doesn't matter, home or away, what their seed is. Coach Curtis just does such an incredible job, but on and off the field. I've had the pleasure of sitting down and talking to him a few times. Awesome man of character, runs the program the right way. There's a reason he's had the longevity that he's had. It's not just because his name is on the school. It's because he does things the right way, obviously that he wins a ton. So I'm surprised in the sense that I thought this Acadiana team had unfinished business. Obviously they lose the state championship last year to Catholic in a game where they really didn't have an answer for Catholic's offense. And so they come back this year. They're undefeated. They're rolling through a really tough non-district schedule. They get into district, which that district is so big, so it's basically their whole season is district games essentially. And they roll through that. And then they get to a point as the 3 seed that you're like, okay, this is them and Ash in the semifinal is probably what you're going to get. And that's a really bad matchup for Ash because of the offense that they run. And then John Curtis catches them on a good night. They make one more play, and believe it or not, John Curtis wins on a passing play, which I'm sure it has been a while since they've won at the end of a game on a pass. But they make a great play. They throw a kind of a jump ball to the left corner of the end zone, right at the pylon. Kid just goes up and just wins a one-on-one battle. It was a great ball. I saw the highlight, and it was just a really pretty play, great ball. And again, here we are talking about John Curtis practicing on Thanksgiving, which is, like I said, it's surely been since like the 80s, probably the last time they didn't practice on Thanksgiving.
The first round matchup with Brother Martin, I thought some of the familiarity and whatnot that Brother Martin would get back on the right side of that series where Curtis has now won 5 straight against the Crusaders. And when that didn't happen, I think everybody, and this is no knock to the Crusaders at all. They're, certainly a tough team. We saw a couple of years ago a team make it to the Dome that going into that season, a lot of folks would have looked at as not their best team, not the one that would have been picked to make the Dome, but they're capable of competing every single year with anyone on any given night. But when Curtis won that first round game and was able to start advancing in the bracket and get rolling a little bit, I think everyone on that half of the bracket had to take a second and think, oh, damn, here goes John Curtis, including Acadiana, who, as much as on some levels they probably were happy to see Curtis and have a shot at beating a team that had beaten them 28-0 last year, had beaten them the last 2 regular seasons. And so to kind of right those wrongs, so to speak, and kind of get their get back, at the same time, Curtis has obviously been a bad matchup for Acadiana. To now 3 straight years, Curtis beats really good Acadiana teams, and they're on to the quarterfinals again, as we mentioned. And now they're a team that everyone the rest of the way is going to have to really kind of keep an eye on, whether it be this week's quarterfinal matchup with Turlings Catholic, or just kind of getting some advanced scouting, advanced film for, from Ash and Bird and company. Everybody has to start taking a little bit more time to look at the Patriots and be ready for them if they continue to roll on. But let's jump into these bracket by brackets. We've the last couple of weeks both looking at the initial brackets and looking at how last week's first round had wound up. We started down with the Division 4 groups, the smaller schools, and worked our way up. And let's start with the Division 4 non-select group, where the teams to advance: Haynesville with a big 61-0 shutout of 16-seeded Montgomery. They'll face Welsh, the 9 seed, who advanced without a game Friday night because of the Faraday situation. Welsh, the Greyhounds, get a bye in the second round on to the quarters to face Haynesville. General Trash came down to North Iberville and beat the Bears 38-6. And so 12th seeded General Trask will advance to the quarters. They'll head next to Jeanneret, the 4 seed, who beat Grand Lake, the 13 seed, 46-24, the final score there. On the bottom half of the bracket, another kind of interesting surprise, but one that I say surprised from a seeding standpoint, but not altogether that surprised to see the Hornets of Franklin moving on. I had picked them for the first round upset. Thought about him in the second round, but went with DeQuincy. Franklin indeed goes out to DeQuincy, gets a 22-19 victory to head on to the quarters. They'll face 6-seeded Logansport, who beat the 11 Elton 49-12. And then all the way at the bottom of the bracket, the 2 and 7 seeds advance. South Plaquemine with a 21-6 win against 18th seeded East Feliciana. And Mangum, the 7 seed, beats 10th seeded West St. John by a 44-6 final. The 19 seed advancing stands out. You have General Trask with an upset as well, but those are teams that have some level of history. And I don't think we're altogether shocked to hear that they're advancing. What did you think when you saw some of this play out? Division 4 non-select.
The upset over DeQuincy is really not a surprise to me, just because, like we talked about in our first playoff show. We weren't really sure who DeQuincy was. Like, they were a 3 seed, which is awesome for them. It's a big moment in school history. But, like, looking at their schedule, we were kind of a little curious of how good they were. So I actually had DeQuincy losing last night also, but I had them losing to White Castle. So I had the right team losing, but the wrong team winning. And so not really a surprise. like we've seen throughout this playoffs, don't look at the seed, look at the schedule that they played. Like look at who John Curtis has played comparative to their seed. Look at who Southern Lab has played comparative to their seed. And so there's lots of examples of that. And so obviously Franklin was a little bit more tested as the 19 seed, and so they are able to keep rolling. And now they take a pretty little hefty trip up to DeSoto Parish to go to Logansport, a place that really since the split, Logansport has just been so consistently good. Trips to the Dome. Coach Kevin McGee does a really good job there. I went to a playoff game there a few years ago against West St. John, and it was an insane atmosphere because Logansport is about as rural as it gets, right? And the entire town is pitch black except for the stadium is just illuminated, and it's just a cool high school environment. So that's going to be a really cool atmosphere for Logansport and Franklin. In this one, one of the surprise, I didn't realize I didn't expect how bad Mangum was going to jump on West St. John. I thought West St. John had a good year kind of trying to get back to their culture and who they've been for so long. I really thought that was going to be a really good game. I actually, in my bracket, had West St. John winning that game. And then Mangum jumps all over. Mangum plays in that super tough district with Oak Grove, Faraday. All right, and so they're obviously prepared for games like this and these big moments. And now you talk about a long trip, Mangum all the way down to South Plaque. All right, once you hit the Gulf, you're there. And so General Trask, another team that that I had. I had this quarterfinal matchup correct in mind. I had Trask and Jerit playing. North Iberville, tremendous first season back playing varsity football. But I knew that General Trask, these seniors that they have played in some playoff games. And so we have to remember that it was, even though North Iberville was the 5 seed, it was only their second playoff game in 15 years or something like that, And so not really ready for that deep run yet. But I'm telling you, I'm a believer. I think North Iberville is going to be a team to just keep watching for the next few years. I think they're going to continually be in the conversation in Division IV non-select. Welsh gets a week off, and Haynesville does exactly what we expected them to do. And so all eyes still point towards the Golden Tornado to be the team to beat in this bracket.
You mentioned the atmosphere to look forward to in games at Logansport, and I think you've got a few of those great venues in this bracket that it's going to be a lot of fun for folks the day after Thanksgiving to go to those games. That long trip down to South Plaquemine, I know from my time up in Monroe, talking to those, the 1A schools in that 1A and 2A schools in that area, that was not a trip that they very much looked forward to when that was the matchup that they ran into on the bracket. Tough place to go down there and play. And I know South Plaquemine is having a nice season right now. And you mentioned North Iberville, same thing to Quincy and some of these other schools that lost. Hopefully this can be a nice kind of step in their process toward, future seasons. That the Quincy with the big turnaround season from a year ago, North Iberville back in varsity football now, that you're never happy when a season ends, but they had great seasons despite the fact that they'll be home for Thanksgiving, and hopefully the kids can just kind of build on that and take some next steps in the years to come. Jumping over to the select side, D4 select, top seeded Vermilion Catholic, 47-17 win over 16 seeded Westminster Christian. St. Edmund, the 8th seed, with a 78-37 win against 9th seeded St. Martin's Episcopal to advance and force a 3-3-7 area quarterfinal next week. Two of those lower seeds we mentioned with all of the the track record and pedigree and all those things. 12th seeded Kentwood and 13th seeded Southern Lab both advanced. They beat respectively 5th seeded Ascension Episcopal 42-16 and 4th seeded St. Frederick 24-7. On the bottom half of the bracket, that 3rd seeded Covenant Christian team you mentioned earlier beats Central Catholic for the second time in a span of a few weeks. They get the 41-13 win, advance to face 11th seeded Ouachita Christian that came down in New Roads and beat Catholic Point Capee 28-6. Riverside Academy 49-6 over Hamilton Christian in the 7-10 game. They advanced to face Ascension Catholic, the 2 seed, who beat 15 seeded Opelousas Catholic 58-13. And so, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, there are some lower seeded teams that advance, but they're all lower seeded teams that we have seen get to the Dome and be successful in the Dome. Throughout their history and even in some recent years. So D4 select, the quarterfinals are set. What are your thoughts on how it's shaken out so far?
It's really shaken out exactly how I expected it to. This is the only bracket that I went 8 for 8 in on my picks. It was kind of, I don't want to say an easy one to pick, but it was one of the less stressful ones to pick because you just know who the usual suspects are. And so, Kentwood for so long being, a non-select school before they kind of rearranged things was always in the conversation. You talk about those 3 teams in the teens, of Ouachita Christian, Kentwood, and Southern Lab. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's got to be at least 20 state championships between those 3 schools. And so not surprising to see them continue to march on. I feel St. Martin's, obviously that score surprises me a little bit. It's a sad way for Harlan Berry to kind of go out. Now, he's got brighter days ahead, hopefully still in Tiger Stadium, given the events of the past week and how that's gone. But, obviously a great career, not the way he wanted to go out, but I'm sure he still had a tremendous game. But Vermilion Catholic and St. Ed's, Vermilion Catholic's still kind of the team to beat in this bracket. St. Edmunds had a really good season. We've talked about them before. They play in that really tough district with Opelousas Catholic, Catholic Point Capee, highly competitive. And then you go into Kentwood and Southern Lab, which, God, the football fan in me is just that's what Thanksgiving football is supposed to be, is Kentwood and Southern Lab playing under the water tower for a chance to go to the semifinal. Covenant Christian, shout out again to my wife's alma mater, who, when she was there, they weren't even in the LHSAA. And now they're making waves as the 3 seed. Rematch with Central Catholic last night. They beat them worse than they did the first time. And so Central Catholic for years has been a highly competitive team, especially in all their years under Coach Minton. And so Covenant Christian now will get to host a quarterfinal game, which would have seemed like a dream to the people in Houma, a few years ago when they were first kind of getting their feet wet in the LHSAA. But now they get to play Ouachita Christian, and we're going to find out really, I think win or lose, we'll find out how good Covenant Christian really is. I don't think the result will determine whether they were a fluke or really not that good, because their 10-0 regular season is not like a fluky one. If you look at their schedule, Jerit, who they handled pretty handily in district, Jerit's still playing. They played some good football teams, and so I don't think they're a fluke at all. I think they deserve to be here. But now they get a really, like I said, win or lose, they have a chance to prove who they are against one of the standards in Division IV every year. All right, Ouachita Christian just keeps it going. You look at their athletes, and Jerit, you know this, you've seen them in person. None of their athletes look like college football players, but they keep finding ways to win every single year and produce college football players. And it's just it's a crazy thing there, but you see that a lot in these small schools when they're just really well coached. You can take a bunch of average looking guys and build a consistent monster of a program, and that's what Ouachita Christian does. And then I think the most exciting game, honestly, from just a pure football standpoint, is the last game on the bottom of that bracket. Ascension Catholic, who has handed me several butt whippings over the years when I was coaching 1A football, playing against Riverside, who is fresh off a dome appearance the year before. Ascension Catholic is really looking to get over that hump and get back to the Superdome. They played for state 2 years in a row. Unfortunately, had to play LCA both times. And so, they're looking to get over that hump and get back to New Orleans. But that might be the game. That might be my game of the week for the whole state, man. And me, I am a soft spot for small schools. I just can't help it. I went to a small school. I've coached small schools. I have so much love and respect for the coaches that take 30 kids and build monsters. It's But that's going to be such a good game. You know better than anybody. Riverside's running back is an absolute baller. All right, his name
Yeah.
escapes me. I know you can touch on it.
Dedrick Lasty might be pound for pound the best football player in the state of Louisiana. He's like 5'4" and just racks up hundreds of yards after hundreds of yards. Had like 540 or whatever it was against St. Martin's earlier this season.
Yeah. So you have him, and then you have obviously the running back at Ascension Catholic is also one of the best football players in the state of Louisiana. And so, I think the over/under on rushing yards in that game might need to get set at like 800, and I'm probably taking the over. All right. I think it's going to be a slugfest. I think it's going to be high scoring. I don't think either team's really going to be able to slow the other down much. Ascension Catholic's second round win might be the most impressive in the bracket. I mean, absolutely demolishing a good Opelousas Catholic team. Opelousas Catholic was the 15th seed, but that doesn't really matter as we've learned this year. They were coming off a big 3-touchdown win over Catholic Point Capee the week before. They were riding really high. Then they beat Westminster Christian Lafayette in the first round of the playoffs in a really tight game. But to dismantle Opelousas Catholic, who's been so consistent, and beat them by 45 points, lets you know that the Bulldogs are ready to make that jump and get back to New Orleans.
I don't even know where to start with some of it. The St. Martin's and St. Edmund game is one that I picked St. Martin's to win, but was kind of torn when I was predicting the bracket and on Lafayette radio this week. I said they've got to find a way to slow down Harlem Berry, but if they can do so, that this St. Edmund team is a really quality team that certainly has a chance to advance. They've got a great running back in their own right, Henry Summerlin, and have just been really good on both sides of the ball out there. I looked up that Kentwood, Southern Lab, and OCS combined titles that you mentioned, 25 between the three schools through the years. So
it's close.
You were certainly right there. Covenant Christian, really talented team that we've talked about before. I think has a lot of 26 and 27 talent on top of this great senior leadership group they have. And so this will be a really interesting matchup of a team that is certainly as talented as anyone in the bracket, but is kind of on the ascent right now and matches up with that OCS team that you mentioned has been through so many battles and won so many trophies. And that's an interesting clash in terms of the history dynamics, and one that, regardless of how it shakes out, will be a big moment for that Covenant Christian program. And, I certainly think they have a chance in that game. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think several games on this bracket are really high on my list of potential destinations where I have to pick which game I'll go cover is kind of the Louisiana versus all y'all game of the week on Friday. And certainly in that mix is that Riverside and Ascension Catholic game that you mentioned, Dedrick Lasty and Chad Elzy. There's a really good chance that this game could go a long way in determining who is the Class 1A offensive player of the year at the end of it, who gets out of this thing and keeps on moving to the semis and potentially beyond. Because I think those two, and then Harlem Berry up top and Jonathan Dartez, the quarterback of Vermilion Catholic, were probably the four likeliest candidates there. And so now you get two of them head to head at the same position on Thanksgiving week, and it's going to be a lot of fun there in Division IV Select for sure. Looking at Division III non-select, St. James, the top seed, with a 48-6 win over 17-seeded Donaldsonville. They'll advance to face the 9-seed Pine, who went out to Kaplan and got a 21-6 win. Union Parish beat Red River 42-8, and so the 5th-seeded Farmers advance and will head next to 4th-seeded Kinder, who beat Westlake 28-12. The bottom half of the bracket, we get that Northeast Louisiana quarterfinal matchup between number 3 Oak Grove and number 6 Sterlington. Oak Grove beat Mansfield 62-14. Sterlington beat Lakeside 49-18. And at the bottom of the bracket, 7th-seeded Gina with a 56-20 win over Port Allen, and Lauraville, a game that I kind of told people to watch out for. The 15th-seeded Lauraville Tigers go to Erath, a team that had beaten them by one score in the season opener, the 2-seed Erath. Lauraville gets the 28-7 win, a big upset for those guys in the second round, and so they're on to the quarters. Thoughts on D3 non-select?
The first thought I have is that Laurelville now to me will always be known as bracket ruiner because I had Erath going to the semis in mine. So this bracket is really for the most part shaping out like we expected, except for that 15th seed Laurelville. But we should have known better, and you did. We talked about it from the first show. Laurelville and Erath in the regular season was an absolute war, and so throw the seeds out the window. I've been on both sides of that. I recall, when Calvary first started out, losing to Evangel by 1 in the regular season, and then we drew them in the playoffs, and we're like, okay, it's get back time, and we lost 42-6. But luckily Laurelville had a little bit more mental toughness than Calvary did back in 06. And so they win the rematch, and they win it with no doubt. They're up 21-0 at half. They end up winning 28-7. They dictated the pace of the game. And so that's a really nice win for Laurelville, a big program win. All right. So now they're going into what I think is a really winnable game against Gina. You could see 15-seeded Laurelville, and it wouldn't shock anybody to see them win again and go to the semis. Now that other quarterfinal matchup on their side of the bracket is about as blue blood North Louisiana football as it gets. Oak Grove and Sterlington, two coaching staffs that both do a tremendous job and just continue to churn out winners every single year. Oak Grove, like we talked about from the first show, lose to Calvary in week 1, which is nothing to be ashamed of. The Cavaliers are still marching on. And haven't lost since. Haven't looked back. Went through some really tough district games and dominated. Their win, like we mentioned, over OCS in Week 10 was a statement to the rest of the state that Oak Grove's ready to go back to New Orleans. But they're going to have to get through a team from their neck of the woods to do it. The over-under on pass attempts in this game might be about 6. So two teams that run the ball extremely well. Sterlington runs the veer out of that I formation. It's really downhill. Their fullback is always a load to bring down. You can correct me on this because you're way more in tapped with the recruiting than I am. Oak Grove still has the La Tech committed quarterback, huh? Bradley?
Yeah, Jackson Bradley.
Yeah, and that kid's, I watched him last year in the playoffs. That kid's a stud.
Yeah.
And so you have Sterlington's run game. You have a D1 talent at quarterback on the other side at Oak Grove. I am a North Louisiana homer, as I'll get out, as you know that. But that's just a great Thanksgiving matchup. Like if I didn't have a game to be at and I was going home to see Mom and them for Thanksgiving, I would absolutely be making that drive to Oak Grove to check that one out.
That's one. That's one for me that if it wasn't such a long trip between probably covering Tulane on Thursday and LSU on Saturday, I would really like to be at. But that just doesn't make a lot of sense for my car and my sleep schedule next week. But it's going to be a fun one up there.
Hey, it's playoff time, Jerit. You can't be soft, man. You got to push through. You got to push through these tough times. All right. Top of the bracket, Kinder and Union Parish. All right. So that's kind of a really good traditional matchup. We asked the question 2 weeks ago, do we feel like Kinder is back? And so they get a bye. They go handle Westlake last night, and now they have an opportunity at home the day after Thanksgiving to prove if they really are or not. Going against Union Parish, a team that just, similar to Oak Grove and Sterlington, just continues to just bang the drum every year, do what they do, running the football. Coach Spadafora does such a great job. You're looking at a really good opportunity. Now, St. James, even though they are young, they're still the 1 seed. You could be looking again in this bracket at another, because we've had it in recent years, another potential all North Louisiana final. Now, granted, whoever wins that Union Parish Kinder game does have to get past St. James, and that has to go to beautiful downtown Vacherie to do it. I wonder if Coach Valdez knows how iconic that phrase will always be. Like, it'll never die now. No matter where he ends up coaching, it'll never die. St. James and Pine, I knew that Pine Kaplan game was going to be a low scoring, tough game. Both teams had marquee wins throughout the year. Pine had some really tough losses to some good teams. Kaplan had their kind of signature win over Southern Lab in the middle part of the season. And so I knew that one was going to be kind of a low-scoring slugfest. And now Pine goes against a St. James team that, just continues to just be so good in that River Parish area. Like the consistency of that program when they're not really pulling kids from a big area, like you're talking about, like they obviously have had some incredible athletes throughout the years. They've sent kids to LSU, they've sent kids to Alabama, Mississippi State. But at the same time, like most of their roster are just high school football players that those coaches get the absolute most out of. Kids that are going to either just go to college to be a student or go be a plant worker and make more money than I make. And so what a great job their staff, no matter who the head coach is, just continuing to do such a good job every single year. If they go to the Dome this year, which I really think they will, I think they've been to the Dome under 3 different head coaches in the past like decade or so, or something like that, maybe a little bit longer. But that just speaks to the testament of the toughness of the kids that come out of that area, like kids like from Lutcher, kids from St. James, the kids that are just, to use a phrase that my students would use, kids that are just built different, So St. James and Pine should be a good one, man. I still think St. James is the team to beat. But they're going to have to earn it like they always do. I mean, you look at Oak Grove, Sterlington, Union Parish, all still being alive that they would have to beat to eventually win it all. They're going to have to earn it. But at this time of the year, no matter who you play, you got to go earn it. So I think this bracket's going to be a fun finish.
They're young enough that at some point this year you could have called the Wildcats more the Wild Kittens, but they played a tough enough schedule that they've grown up in a hurry. They had all of the talent in the world, was just a young group, but they've come along throughout some of these battles and are going to be really tough to beat this time of year, particularly when folks have to go down to beautiful downtown Vacherie. We mentioned in the D4 select, a little shout out to Dedrick Lasty, another kid who gets overlooked from a recruiting standpoint because he's on the smaller side, but is an absolute dynamic playmaker for those guys. Just a little shout out to Jakias Villanueva, who is a junior this year that I joked with about you're the old man of this group now. You've been following Kobe and Braden and all those guys, and now as a junior, you have to already be kind of the senior leader or one of the senior leaders because of how young this team is. And with him and a lot of other talent on that team for the years to come, including his younger brother, they're rolling right now at the right time of year for sure. And it's going to be interesting to watch them versus Pine this week. That, a potential for a Dome rematch in the semifinal if they and Union Parish can advance. It's going to be a lot of fun up and down that bracket, as you mentioned, with some of the other games along the way as well. Looking at D3 select, one that we always enjoy quite a bit. You mentioned your alma mater, Calvary Baptist, and we'll get to them on the bottom half of the bracket. But starting up top, number 1 seed Dunham, you want to talk about a no-doubter in a rematch. They shut out Parkview Baptist 42-0. Lafayette Christian gets the best of a rematch with Notre Dame, who had beaten them in week 7 in district play. Lafayette Christian gets a 35-28 win this time out, heading back out to Crowley. Bunkie, the 5 seed, a 39-14 win over 12th seeded Amite. 4th seeded Jewel Sumner, 48-28 over Slaughter Community. And so we get a Sumner and Bunkie quarterfinal. That Calvary Baptist team, another shutout, 38-0 over De La Salle to advance. They'll face Episcopal, the 6th seed, who beat Pope John Paul II 24-7. And the bottom quarterfinal matchup, 2 seed Isidore Newman versus 7 seed Catholic New Iberia. Those 2 teams beat Darbone Woods Charter and Northlake Christian to advance. And so a lot of maybe a couple of names there on the quarterfinal lines that folks aren't as used to seeing in some deep playoff runs, but a lot of familiar faces filling up that D3 quarterfinal bracket.
Yeah, and this is another one where we still didn't get the top 8 seeds advancing. Lafayette Christian wrecked that by being the 9 seed and making it here. I really liked the opportunity for LCA in a rematch. Everybody that plays sports knows that it's really hard to beat a good team twice. And so LCA gets another shot. They get the win. And then they go now to face Dunham, And again, I have to – God, how fun would this game have been a year ago? quarterback wise. I said the same thing about a couple of quarterback matchups earlier in the playoffs. Like if we're 1 year ago, how much fun would this be? But
Look,
Dunham just
Jawan Johnson and that 24 class is going from LCA, but Braylon Walker, the 26 out there, there's a lot of talent at LCA, and it seems like they're coming together at the right time. Obviously, a tumultuous early season for them, some ups and downs, but that's a team that I picked to get to the Dome because I think they have the talent to do so. They made me look good last night. They'll have a tough one, obviously, this week. This might be where I end up, honestly, but we'll see how it goes.
I'm not. I know this isn't an LSU show, but I'm at the point with the Tigers where I just say put Juwan at quarterback and let him just go show you what he did for the last 4 years. Let him. The offense needs a spark. Let him. Why did you recruit him? Let him go show you why you recruited him. Dunham getting to host another deep playoff game, which they've been doing in the last couple of years. Neil Weiner, one of the absolute just nicest and best human beings out there as far as coaches go. He deserves all the success in the world.
Yeah.
Committed to building a winner at Dunham and continuing to be consistent. He's had opportunities in the last few years to maybe – I know bigger schools have called. I know that for a fact. And he's just – his response has always been, hey, go Tigers. And he's committed to Dunham. And it's paying off now because, he's had elite talent. You have Derek Stingley, you have House, the quarterback last year, and now you're looking at, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And so talk about another coaching staff that takes one or two really great athletes and then a whole bunch of just high school football players, and they put it together to make an incredible season so far. And so that's going to be a great game. I'm going to apologize to everyone at Bunkie High School. I wasn't a believer, and now I am. Not that I knew that they weren't a good team. I knew that they were obviously very talented, but I saw a meet, and I didn't have enough confidence to put Bunkie through to the quarters, and I was wrong. All right, and so they handle a meet by 4 touchdowns, and so now they're going to Sumner. All right, so they're playing the same district back-to-back weeks. All right, and so I'm sure they've already seen Sumner on film due to their during their A-meet prep, so they already kind of have an idea. Sumner's a really cool place to go play. I coached a playoff game there a few years ago. I don't know if you've been to Sumner in recent years.
I have.
But
early on in my career, I guess I did a little TV thing out there.
But that stadium is kind of in a bowl, and so it's a really cool high school atmosphere. And so that's going to be a really good matchup. Again, we're going to have a. Last week I said we're going to find out how good Bunkie is. And now I'm going to say now we get to see if Bunkie can keep showing us how good they are because they've proven how good they are, and now they get a chance to keep proving it. Calvary and Episcopal, 2 teams that have been quarterfinal staples in Division III. Coach Travis Bourgeois does such a great job at Episcopal every year. One of the nicest human beings in the state as far as coaches go. Calvary Baptist, like you said, my alma mater, just keeps on chugging along. Coach Rodney Guin does such a great job, such a great career at Houghton, comes over to Calvary and has just kept the train going that John Bachman Sr. started whenever he took over in 2011. And so that's going to be a great game again. 2 teams that have different styles. All right, Episcopal's a little bit more ground heavy, and Calvary, even with Simon, the Texas commit at running back, still love to air it out with Abram Wardell and some of those great receivers like Colby Thomas that they have there. And then you go to the bottom of the bracket, 2 teams that are always in the quarterfinal conversation in this bracket, and it's Catholic of New Iberia and it's Isidore Newman. Newman is a team that we've talked about a lot. Can they finally get over the hump? The only teams that have ever had a Manning at quarterback and not won a championship is basically Newman. Peyton Manning's won Super Bowls. Eli Manning won Super Bowls. We expect Arch to have a great career at Texas when his time comes. And so they've had really good talent. Odell Beckham, you just go down the list. But there's a glass ceiling that they haven't been able to punch through yet. Is to get to the elite part of that conversation in the state. Is this the year that they finally do it? All right. Darbone Woods Charter goes all the way down from, we talked about it last week, from Farmerville to New Orleans is not a short bus ride. Even on a charter, that ain't a short trip. And so, you know,
It's like
can
that's like traveling abroad for the folks from up there to head to Uptown.
yeah. By the way, Mangum to South Plaque is a 5.5 hour drive. I did look that up. And so Newman, all right, can they finally get over the hump? All right, so they're in a position now with the way the playoffs work now with the higher seeds. They won't have to travel again at all if they go to the Dome. They'll literally be home, 5 minutes down the road to the Superdome. And so can they take advantage of that? Like we talked about last week, Newman is a really cool place to play. It's a great environment. It's an interesting stadium design with no visiting stands, you know, and surrounded by the school. It's a great atmosphere. Can they find a way to slow down Catholic of New Iberia, who's coming off a 40-plus point win over Northlake? Can they get the best of Calvary or the Episcopal winner at home again in the semis? And can they finally break through? And that's really what my biggest question about this whole bracket is. It's not even about my alma mater. It's not about the 1 seed Dunham. It's really can Isidore Newman finally break through and get a trip to the Superdome?
I texted some of the Calvary coaches last night and said, "Look, I know y'all are rolling right now, but y'all be nice to my guy Travis and the Knights heading up there. You know, that's good, folks. We'll see how that matchup shakes out. I do think Calvary is certainly the team to beat in that one, and to me, I picked as the eventual champion in this. But we'll see how it all shakes out. I like all of the higher seeds in this bracket, but I wouldn't be surprised by any of the lower seeds this week, other than I'd be a little bit surprised if Episcopal goes up to Shreveport and knocks off the defending champs. Um, I think the Catholic New Iberia matchup for Newman is less than ideal for the Greenies at this point in the quarterfinals. I like that Bunkie team going out to Sumner to face a team that, as you mentioned, they've seen on film already as they prepped for a meet. And that Dunham and LCA game, the winner of that one is who I saw reaching on to the Dome this year. And that's going to be a lot of fun and one that, again, I may end up at next Friday. As we get up to Division II non-select, we have a district rematch at the top of the bracket, Franklinton and Lakeshore. The Demons of Franklinton get a 42-21 win over Westfell. Lakeshore beats Iota 17-10. The other quarterfinal in that half of the bracket, the 4 and the 5 seeds, Franklin Parish and Iowa advance. Franklin Parish 35-14 over Bruley. Iowa 24-8 over Wassman in another rematch of a regular season game. Bottom half of the bracket, a couple of teams that we talked about earlier advancing in 14 seed Opelousas, 18 seed Cecilia. Opelousas went out to Jennings and got a 30-19 win. They'll next face Plaquemine, the 6 seed, who beat Northwest 49-34. Cecilia, the 18 seed, got that 49-41 win at 2nd seeded Lutcher, handed Lutcher its first loss of the season at a bad time for the LHS Bulldogs. And North DeSoto, the 7 seed, getting healthy at the right time of year late this season, 38-14 win over Bell Chase. And so they'll get to host Cecilia this week in what is another one of those really fun North Louisiana matchups that I won't get a chance to make the trip up for, but I think folks in that area should certainly go check out. Division II non-select, always a fun one and looks really fun again as we get ready for Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, and so this bracket, ever since they kind of reconfigured the select non-select, 3 years ago, including more of those magnet schools and stuff like that. So this bracket changed a little bit. Some of those teams that are traditionally Division II non-select got slid over to the select side. And what I think it did, though, from a positive standpoint, is it made this the most unpredictable, fun bracket in the state to look at every year. Like I mentioned, when they first did it, I was working at West Feliciana, and we looked at the teams in the bracket, and we were like, there's like 15 schools that could win state.
Yeah.
And it's not like cut and dry like it is maybe where it's like 4 teams in one classification. Franklinton Lakeshore, like you mentioned, that's a district rematch. A game that was 14-14 at the half. Franklinton takes the lead in the third quarter. Both teams get a couple scores in the fourth, and Franklinton takes that one 35-28 in a back and forth dogfight in the middle part of the season. And so, talk about it real how hard it is to beat a good team twice. And so Coach Brett Endest is one of the better coaches in the state. All right. Coaches the option maybe better than anybody. All right. You put him up there with Acadiana and Curtis and like just the way he coaches that option attack. I know that Franklinton probably not very excited to have to coach against an option team again. Fortunately for them, they've seen it before. As a coach, I can attest that one of the worst feelings in the world is drawing an option team in the playoffs and you've never seen it. Like you didn't see it all season. It's one of the big reasons why Catholic High scrimmages Southside in the fall, because they want to see that look at least once and talk about the run fits and everything like that before you have to see it in late November. And so not the draw I'm sure Franklinton wanted as far as style of offense, but it is a familiar face. Iowa continues to be a staple on Thanksgiving week. Franklin Parish just keeps winning, and it's a really cool story. Franklin Parish, busting on the scene this year as the 4 seed, which is a little bit of unfamiliar territory for them. They had that big marquee win over Calvary in the regular season. Handle up Bruley. Coach Schooler at Bruley does a really good job every year. And so they kind of route the Bruley Panthers to set up this home quarterfinal matchup, which as much talent as they have, I don't think many of us were predicting a Franklin Parish home playoff game in the quarterfinals. But that quarterback is an absolute stud, man. Like he can get up and go. And I think that's going to be one of the more fun matchups in this bracket. Plaquemine, 49-34 winner, like you mentioned, over Northwest. That score is not accurate to how Plaquemine dominated that game. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was like 42-14 at one point, and then Northwest got some scores back. I think Plaquemine handled that game kind of from the jump. Plaquemine's had a few games like that where the score looks a lot closer than what they did to people. And so that's a really fun one. Plaquemine getting a host to quarterfinal game. It's been a few years for them, especially after last year's playoff. They were a really high seed a couple years ago and had an unfortunate incident with Jennings after the game that was just kind of ugly and a sad way to end their season. But now they're back, new leadership. Coach Williams is doing an incredible job. They're in the quarterfinals. And talk about another really fun matchup. Both of us looked at Opelousas 2 weeks ago and we were like, talk about your seed doesn't matter. That's a team that you could just wipe their seed away and know that they are really ready to go maybe win another state championship. They played Ash in a really tight game. They played Zachary in a really tight game. They're a tropical storm away from the toughest schedule maybe in the country, because like that Carr game gets canceled. They could have had Zachary, Ash, and Carr and Turlings, who's still playing, all on their non-district schedule. And so on paper, the toughest schedule in the state, and now it's proving because all the teams they played are still playing, basically, with the obviously Zachary fell short last night. North DeSoto, Coach Dennis Dunn keeps taking the North DeSoto Griffins to new heights. North DeSoto, growing up in Shreveport, was never that strong of a program. He comes in and has done nothing but win, which is just what he does because he's just a winner. He wins with his boys off the field. He's a tremendous man and got a great family. And he keeps winning on the field, I think, just because of how well he does things off it. I think his kids want to play hard for him, and that continues, especially in DeSoto Parish. Like I mentioned last week, a lot of just tough blue-collar kids. And so they are earning the right to host another quarterfinal game this year. And then you got to talk about Big Daddy Cool, Diesel Solari at Cecilia. That's a 90s wrestling reference for anybody on the channel that doesn't get that. And so Diesel did what a lot of us kind of expected them to do. I did pick Lutcher in my bracket. I won't lie about it. But we knew that was a terrible matchup for Lutcher. That was a terrible draw. They almost matched their point total. Cecilia scored 99 points in 2 playoff games. And that is really scary and I heard it on Louisiana Prep scoreboard last night when I was driving home from our game. Like they said it, and it's just the reality. If Diesel is healthy, they can't really be stopped. It's going to take a really special defensive plan to stop these guys if he's healthy. And we know the offense runs through him. He's not the only kid on that team, though, that's talented, obviously, but he is kind of the rudder that steers the ship. And so if Diesel's healthy, that potential Opelousas-Cecilia semifinal is something you and I have talked about for a few weeks now. Every time those two teams play, it is war from the first whistle to the last. It was a 1-point game, I'm pretty sure, this year in their district matchup. Rematch of last year's state championship. Now they have to beat a really good Plaquemine and a really good North Dakota team to get there. Both teams that are very well coached. But it's hard to not look ahead at that, just because of the history between the two teams. But man, when Diesel's rocking, there's maybe not a more exciting player in the state.
Yeah, add him to that list of pound for pound most talented kids in the state list, because he's phenomenal. As you mentioned, that's a really good Bulldogs team overall. It's certainly not just him, but he is the straw that stirs the drink. Also shout out to Ellis Stewart, another versatile senior athlete for those guys. That it is the guy that stepped in quite a bit when Diesel was banged up at points this year, but that list goes on. There's interviews with those two guys, Brent Gordon Jr., Louisiana Raging Cajuns commit in that senior class, who is one of my favorite players in the state, as well as a couple of their super sophomores, and Frankie Frank Jr. and Braylon Kale. That are all those interviews are up on the channel. And as much as we can start to look a little bit ahead and say, if we get that Cecilia and Opelousas matchup, the big fear for Coach Skanes and Coach Zachary has to be, let's hope our kids are not looking ahead to that, because those are two really capable teams in North DeSoto and Plaquemine on the opposite sides from them. But this bracket that we talk about every year as unpredictable, I've got 8 for 8 of the quarterfinals, so I'm pleased with myself just because of how crazy this bracket can be to have gotten this right so far. But I have a feeling that could go off the rails here pretty quickly, because every team in this bracket is capable of advancing further at this point and making that trip to the Dome, that dream trip, a reality. We'll see how those kids handle this week of preparation on Thanksgiving week, and who's able to keep on pushing. In Division II Select, we have the New Orleans matchup up top. First seeded Archbishop Shaw and 8th seeded John F. Kennedy. Those two teams beat LaRanger 49-14 and Lake Charles College Prep 51-37. We get an all Baton Rouge matchup across from it. Madison Prep, the 5 seed, and Estruma, the 13 seed. They're in the quarters for the first time since 2003. Madison Prep beat St. Charles Catholic 34-20. Estruma beat Haynes Academy 42-16. Bottom half of the bracket, the all Bayou matchup, 3 and 6, E.D. White and Vanderbilt Catholic. The Cardinals beat Livingston Collegiate 51-14, and the Terriers beat Archbishop Hannon 49-9. And at the bottom of the bracket, we have Booker T. Washington, the 18 seed, who advanced because of that bye situation with U High after the litigation this past week. And Leesville, the 7 seed, 42-24 over Loyola Prep. They'll get a chance to host Booker T. Washington out at the they call it the Wampus Dome, the Wampa Dome, whatever, out there in Leesville. Another place that should be absolutely rocking on Friday night after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and so this bracket, kind of what we expected at the top. We knew that John F. Kennedy was, even though they were the 8th seed, they were better than their seed because of some unfortunate, like the forfeits that they had early in the year. Creates a rematch. If I'm not mistaken, I think Shaw and JFK played last year in the playoffs.
They did in the quarters last year.
Yeah. And so Archbishop Shaw, they get the bye. They roll through LaRanger last night. And so in this bracket, and we've looked at this a lot with some of the other brackets, but like it just feels like it's Shaw's bracket to lose. They just seem like kind of and it's not to disparage any of the other teams. They just look kind of like the undisputed favorite. Obviously they're extremely well coached. And so JFK, like I said, better than an 8 seed. Some forfeits early in the season. That should be a really, really exciting game over there. The Madison Prep Estruma one, me being a local guy here, is really exciting. It's been a while, if I'm not mistaken, since we had an EBR game like this, like in the quarterfinals. That doesn't include one of the traditional U High Catholic, like Dunham, against each other. Like, this doesn't happen that often where we get BR schools against each other this deep into the playoffs. And so Madison Prep, coming off a really good season, their non-district schedule, like we've discussed, was really tough. Mandeville, Southside, some really tough 5A opponents. They get that huge marquee win over U High, second time in 3 years to win that district championship. And now they are facing, Sid the Kid and the Estruma Indians, the mayoral candidate, which is still so funny to say that he's coaching in the quarterfinals and running for mayor in a runoff at the same time. Sounds like some really small town stuff, not Baton Rouge,
Small town or like a Forrest Gump situation where you're just kind of involved in everything all at once and all the storylines are playing out.
Yeah, no doubt. And so Estruma, it's really exciting for them, that whole community. Sid Edwards has been a really important part of that part of Baton Rouge for a really long time, going back to his days at Redemptorist. And so that creates a really fun matchup. That game's likely going to be at Olympia Stadium because Catholic High's got a home game too. So Catholic will likely be at Memorial. So over at Olympia, you'll get Madison Prep and Estruma. Edie White Vanderbilt rematch, a game that was 21-14 in favor of the Cardinals in the regular season. Coach Wallace has Vanderbilt quickly turned around. Whenever that job became available last year, not really giving anything away here. This is just the reality. A lot of coaches were very interested in that Vanderbilt Catholic job. A lot of quality coaches, like coordinators from really good programs, head coaches from some smaller schools, because they saw that there is great potential there. Even in a very crowded area, my wife's from that Houma, Thibodaux area. There's a lot of high schools in that area. All right, so there's a lot of options for kids, even private schools. Edie White, Vanderbilt. There's a lot of options. But Vanderbilt was an attractive job to a lot of high-quality candidates. So attractive that it drew Brian Wallace out of the collegiate game where he was a coordinator at a really good program in Nichols to come take that job. Obviously, a school he probably was familiar with, being right down the road from Vandy. And so they're in a situation to where they are in a little bit of unfamiliar territory playing on Thanksgiving. It's been a minute for them. And so they're going against an Edie White team that they probably know better than they know anybody. All right, this is a rivalry in every sense of the word. If I'm not mistaken, I think they call this the Holy War or something like that. And so two teams that know each other very well. It's a big rivalry across all sports, especially in baseball. And so now they're rematching here in the quarterfinals, and I think that's going to be a really fun one. And then Leesville, Booker T. Booker T. They did everything the right way. It's like, some people might say, oh, well, they don't deserve to be in the, well, hey, they had one playoff game and they won it. They can't help the circumstances. And so I know those kids, they've worked really hard all season and they won their playoff game on the road in the first round and they've earned the right to still get to play. And so regardless of what's going on, I know those kids don't care about the circumstances. They're excited to get to practice this week, but they do run into a Leesville team. Traditionally really tough place to play in November, especially. Xavier Ford is going to carry the ball 1 million times this season. I'm sure at some point he's going to hit that number. And so he's a really exciting player, one of the best pure runners probably in the state. And so we know that he puts up crazy numbers just based on talent and the volume of carries that he gets. And so that's going to be a fun one. It's good to see Leesville hosting a Thanksgiving week game. I think it's where they belong, as far as just traditional powers. And they're the Wampus Cats. I'm not sure what a Wampus Cat is, but I don't want to fight it. I know that. And so that's going to be it's good to see them hosting a deep playoff game again.
I've looked it up before, some sort of mythological cat creature, and one of the best mascots you could ask for, not just in Louisiana, but anywhere in the country. And you mentioned Xavier Ford, who's put up ridiculous numbers. There's a wealth of good running backs in this bracket as well. Obviously, Shaw has the Michigan commit, Jasper Parker, but pardon me, the list goes on well past that. I mean, Jalen Coleman at Vanderbilt Catholic is committed to Liberty. Kyrie Paul, underrated Southeastern Louisiana commit at Estruma. And just, I mean, really up and down that bracket. Alfred McKnight at Madison Prep was so pivotal in that win against U High and has been so big for those guys all year long. And finally, moving up to Division One and starting again with the non-select side, top seeded Neville with a 44-13 win over Covington advances to face the Cinderella of the bracket. 24th seeded Chalmette with a second straight upset. They go to Hanville and get a 35-31 win. And so the Owls will be practicing on Thanksgiving week and then traveling up to Bill Ruppel Stadium for a Friday game. West Monroe with its second straight upset. I don't know that you can ever really call the West Monroe Rebels a Cinderella, but they get their second straight upset. They go to Mandeville and get a 20-9 win, and will head next to fourth seeded Central Baton Rouge, who got the best of West Ouachita 45-20. Bottom half of the bracket, Ruston beats Zachary again 42-21 this time around in the rematch of last year's Dome game. Southside gets a 47-0 shutout of 22 seeded Walker, and we'll head up to Ruston next, up to Haas Garrett Stadium. Northwood Shreveport could not hang with Destrehan, the 10 seed who went up to Shreveport, got a 63-21 win, and we'll have to head right back to Shreveport next week to face the second seeded Airline Vikings after Airline gets a 42-16 win against 18th seeded Westgate. Another real fun bracket. I think we're just going to say that pretty much every time. Some really good teams that are going to be playing next Friday.
Yeah, man, and this one is like you said, Chalmette. That's awesome. Like, that's so much fun for that community and that school. You beat two teams from the same district back-to-back weeks, both on the road. Two teams in Terrebonne usually always have a ton of talent. And then you go to Hahnville, a team with a ton of history, lots of talent, trips to the Dome in the last few years. And they find a way to pull it off. I don't know if you follow the Chalmette Owls Twitter account, but it is wild, and they give a second-by-second breakdown of everything happening with Chalmette athletics, and so it's awesome that they keep everybody up to date there, all the Owl alums around the world. West Monroe has really turned it on. Their seed shouldn't. They're one of those teams that you can't consider them like John Curtis. You can't consider them by what their seed is. They have played in big games for a really long time, and they know how to handle long road trips, from Monroe to Mandeville. They know how to handle that. They know how to schedule the day out to where they're not sitting around and it's by the minute, and they're just one of those well-run programs that knows how to handle this time of year. And so now they run into another long trip for them, down from Monroe to lovely central Louisiana, going up against Coach David Semino. And Coach Camp, Coach Morris on the defense and offensive coordinators, respectively. Guys that just do a really, really good job. We saw them this year. They were well coached. They're very tough. I think that kind of just comes from that spirit. Coach Semino kind of just oozes out, is just that toughness. And so he's restored a lot of that pride and toughness in Central that they always were under Coach Edwards, always very tough. But he's just kind of taking it to a new level, and it kind of matches his personality. And so that's going to be a slugfest. Like, that's going to be some big hitting. That is going to be some really good guys on the defensive side of the ball for Central. The Mays boys going up against West Monroe, who's physically imposing, really big on the O-line. And so there's going to be some really sore kids after this game, regardless of what the score is. Ruston and Southside's a matchup that I texted you about a couple of days ago, because I am so intrigued by this matchup, because this isn't just the Southside we've known in the last few years. This is Southside under Jess Curtis. And you talk about another coach that brings a level of toughness that rivals almost anybody in the state. And not only do they run an option style offense, which if you haven't seen it much is hard to prepare for, it's a level of toughness that coach brings with him wherever he coaches, whether it be Manny, Natchitoches Central, now at Southside. So they mirror their head coach's intensity. They go and shut out a talented Walker team that was coming off a big win. For Ruston, it is a giant change in preparation for their defensive staff. Like, you go from seeing a Zachary team that runs the ball really well, but out of the spread, out of 10 personnel, and then now you're going to face Southside that's going to run that double wing option look at you, and it's a very different way of running the football. And so to me, that's a really tough matchup for a really good Ruston team. How much is Ruston going to get the football? How much can Southside dictate the pace of the game? Can they pull kind of what John Curtis has done in recent years, where they run a play, get 4 yards, and then sit there and stare at the sideline until the play clock gets to about 7, and then they get under center and they run it again. And so is it going to be that kind of game? Is this going to be a 21-14 game because Ruston only got the ball 3 times, or something like that? And so that's to me the most intriguing matchup. It might not be the best game, but it's the most intriguing matchup on paper because of the style of offense. Airline and Destrehan, man, I saw Destrehan this year. Obviously, you were there too. Week 1 in a storm that would make Noah blush. I'm talking about the turf has air bubbles in it because the field won't drain. I've never seen anything like it. And so Destrehan has just got better and better and better throughout the season. And so now they go and they whoop Northwood Shreveport. Again, a long road trip from Destrehan to Shreveport. And so now they're going to come home and go back to Bossier. All right, and so they're going to get a lovely tour of the 318 area code in back-to-back weeks. So now they're going to go to Airline Drive, and they are going to go against maybe the highest flying offense still remaining in the bracket. Ben Taylor is a gunslinger. Coach Scoggin does a really good job at Airline. That offense is so much fun to watch. I really was surprised that Westgate didn't score more points. That's kind of been the MO of Airline this year, is they've had games where they've allowed a lot of points, but they found ways to win. They gave up, over 40 to Evangel. They gave up 54 to Huntington. And so they've always found ways to outscore teams, but shout out to their defense. A Westgate team with a lot of weapons, and they're able to kind of just keep them in check all night and get a really lopsided victory. And now that creates what is probably the best game in this bracket for next week, which is Destrehan Traditional Power and another team, Airline, proving that they belong among the state's elite. Because people can talk, District 1-5A, nobody plays defense. They haven't played a good defense yet. Well, they have a chance to prove it at home the day after Thanksgiving against a really good Destrehan team that is loaded with D1 talent. And so this is a big moment for the Airline football program to really show who they are and that they belong.
Yeah, love that matchup for sure. Airline, as you mentioned, as prolific as they've been on offense, and Jaden Gladney and those guys on the defensive side of the football, making the plays that they need to in some spots in some of these big games down the stretch. Destrehan is a team I know folks saw, whether it be early or middle of the season, at points when they were dealing with some injuries and started to overlook them a little bit. But Jackson Fields, the junior quarterback, is healthy now. He's got those wealth of weapons around him. Jabari Mack, Johnny Theo, Phillip Wright, Gregory Wilfred, the young sophomore running back Malachi Dabney coming on, and with Jackson back, again, similar to what we talk about with Diesel as kind of the straw that stirs the drink for a really talented group. They're a much different football team with him feeling good and all of those weapons kind of getting into their rhythm down the stretch. Love this bracket. I mean, once we're this time of year, all these brackets are so much fun. Looking forward to a lot of these games for sure. And winding it down and getting you out of here before I imagine your wife and kids get any more upset with me once again as we get wrapped up talking high school football. The Division I select bracket, The number 1 seeded Edna Carr Cougars 56-6 past Huntington. St. Thomas More, the 8 seed, heartbreaker for the 9 seed St. Aug Purple Knights in that 28-27 loss out there in Lafayette to the Cougars. We get y'all's matchup, 4th seeded Catholic Baton Rouge advances with a 42-0 shutout of East Jefferson, and will host the 5th seeded Rummel Raiders following a 50-25 win against McDonough 35. Obviously, we see that Catholic and Rummel matchup seems like most postseasons of late. Turlings Catholic gets the best of Jesuit, 31-23, and so the 6th seeded Rebels advance to host that 19th seeded John Curtis Christian team we talked an awful lot about at the outset. John Curtis with the 28-27 win against Acadiana. And then a 3-1-8 matchup. Alexandria, the 2 seed, gets a 49-6 win against 18th seeded Evangel Christian. And the 10th seeded Bird Yellow Jackets come on down to South Louisiana and get a 37-15 win against 7th seeded St. Paul's to head on to the quarters. I mentioned we talked a bunch about John Curtis at the beginning, but just looking at the rest of this bracket and a lot of teams that are higher seeded teams getting the wins other than the Bird, the 10-7. But Bird, like a lot of these higher seeded teams, and I mean, just like John Curtis, they're used to playing this time of year and making some playoff runs. How we feeling heading into Thanksgiving week in D1 Select?
Really good, because I'm getting to go to practice this week. No, man, but this bracket is basically unfolding like we expected. There's a couple of things that did surprise me. I really thought Bird with the travel down to St. Paul's, I really thought
Same.
the Wolves would kind of take that one. I thought Jesuit with the little bit of an up and down season for Jesuit, some big wins, some surprising losses. The game against Rummel, the score really surprised me after they had the big win the week before against Curtis. So that ended up being obviously a great game. And shout out to Turlings for making a little bit of a playoff run here. And then the quote unquote, like we've talked about, surprise of the bracket is number 19, John Curtis. Going back to Thanksgiving, I'm pretty sure that if God rested on the 7th day, on the 8th day, he decided Curtis would practice on Thanksgiving because this is what they do. And so you can call it a surprise, but like we've said, it's not really a surprise. But I did expect that Acadiana team to make a deeper run. They were really talented. They felt like they had unfinished business from losing the state championship the year before. They were setting all kinds of offensive passing records, which was new for them. And so you really thought that they were kind of on a mission at least to make it to that semifinal. But again, you don't tug on Superman's cape and you don't pick against Coach Curtis in the playoffs. He may not always make it, but you still don't pick against him. And so, the top of the bracket is kind of unfolding basically like we expected. I think both of us felt like the AUG STM game was the only real toss-up in the top part of the bracket at this point. And it ended up living up to the hype. I mean, a partially blocked PAT with about a minute in the game gives the Cougars the win, who another team that has only got better after they played a really tough early season schedule. 1 point win over Karen Crow, tight loss to Catholic High, and then they play Acadiana and Neville back to back. And so after that, they refocused, they ran through their district pretty easily, and now they are back again, another team where they expect to be, which is practicing on Thanksgiving. But they've got to go to Algiers on the day after Thanksgiving, which is, you've been down there a ton. It ain't easy. And so that's going to be a fun one, contrasting of styles. Two teams that have elite coaching staffs, Carr and St. Thomas More. And so, both teams are going to be ready to play. Rummel and Catholic High, a rematch of the semifinal from last year, a game that was just an odd game. Catholic scores, bang, bang, 14-0. And then late in the second quarter, Rummel, bang, bang, tied up at 14. And then the bottom fell out in the third quarter and it rained. And then the lightning was so bad that you remember that game had to be finished the next day, just like a couple other games like Zachary and Dutchtown and a few others in the area. LCA's game had to be pushed. And so we came back and played the fourth quarter the next day. Very odd, like environment. It was still daylight, and it's a semifinal fourth quarter. Catholic gets the best of them. So, they're going to be ready for a rematch there. John Curtis and Turlings. Again, it is the been there versus the haven't been there, even though the haven't been there is the higher seed. These Curtis kids have played in some really big games. They've played for – this senior class has played for state championships. And so Turlings hasn't. And so how much does that matter at this point in the playoffs? And I think it does. I'm not trying to pick a winner today, but I am saying that experience does matter when you get into the Thanksgiving and beyond weeks in the playoffs. And then the final game at the bottom, a little bit of a surprise for Byrd. Byrd played in that highly competitive District 1-5A. They lose to Parkway, Airline, and Shreve. They finished fourth in their district, and here they are practicing on Thanksgiving. It shows you how competitive that district was. And they're going up against an Ash team that they know a little bit, North Louisiana schools. They haven't played against them, but everybody knows what Ash does. They know that JT Lindsay is an absolute dog at the running back position, committed to LSU. Another guy that we hope sticks for the sake of our state, given what's been going on this week. Another Shreveport hurdle for Coach Thomas Bachman, who's a Shreveport guy, to get over as he continues to try to march this season along with Ash. As good as JT Lindsay is, though, you and I have talked about, don't sleep on the passing game at Ash. That quarterback is really talented. When they need to throw the ball, they are highly effective at it. And so that creates another contrast of styles. Imagine going from preparing for Pop Houston to preparing for the double wing option. Not the same, quite a different contrast of styles. But that defensive staff at Alexandria is really, really good. Holding Pop Houston to 6 points is tough to do.
Yeah.
I thought this was going to be honestly like a 50-35 type game, like where Ash was the better team. Ash got the win. But I didn't think they'd really slow down Pop the way that they did. And it shows, there's going to be a lot of teams on Evangel's schedule next year watching this tape, trying to figure out, okay, what's the blueprint for slowing this kid down? And so that creates a really fun North Louisiana matchup, more North Louisiana matchups than we're used to across the brackets at this point in the season. Usually the playoffs are mostly dominated by you Southern Louisiana boys down here, and there's usually a few of us in the north hanging around. But the North Louisiana is still well represented on Thanksgiving week. I don't think there's a bad game in this bracket. I think you're looking at 4 slugfest dogfights, and I think that whoever gets to the semi in this bracket is really going to earn it. And honestly, I think when you get to the semis, you can make the case for all 4 teams being the state champion.
Yeah, it's a great group of teams, always is in Division I Select. That Alexandria team, I was texting Brett McCormick earlier about how interesting of a path it could be for them to New Orleans if they can make it that far, to go from preparing for the artistry of Peyton Houston at that quarterback spot and just the makeup of that Evangel team that hasn't been as great up front or on defense, but has been able to score with anyone in the state pretty much. And then you turn around and go face their district foe, Byrd, who is obviously a polar opposite team in terms of what you're preparing for. And then do you get a Curtis or a Turlings Catholic that is going to be, again, more run heavy, but they all do it in different ways. And then if you do keep pushing on, who do you get in a state championship game? Catholic obviously is the reigning champion, but a different looking Catholic team from a year ago. Do you get the top seeded Edna Carr Cougars, who suddenly you go from potentially preparing for Byrd and Curtis, maybe back-to-back weeks, or Byrd and Turlings, to now you have to deal with the downfield explosive athleticism of an Edna Carr, if that ends up being the case. But I think as much as folks are going to look at Carr and Catholic in this bracket because of just the history there, Alexandria has played as well as anyone all year long. And so make sure to keep an eye on those guys this week. And if they can push it, certainly beyond just kind of following the Trojans on through, but they've got to get through that Yellow Jackets team first. We talked an awful lot about Curtis. Turlings has been in some deep playoff runs in D2, but I think one of the interesting storylines of Division I Select this year was just how would they, and then obviously the back-to-back state champion in D2 STM Cougars, how would they handle this jump up to the Division I Select bracket where it's a little bit more of a slugfest from earlier on in the bracket all the way through. Rummel and Catholic, not much more needed to be said there. I think you and a lot of folks kind of assume that I'll be there regardless of how much I like some of these other matchups. I've watched that game so many times through the years, and it's intriguing every single time out. And then that Edna Carr team that, folks that are potentially tuning in here or still watching or whatever the case may be, and not liking hearing me pick anyone other than Catholic High to win. Carr is the team that I forecasted as the champions in this bracket, but I think this STM matchup is really interesting for them, that either Cougars team could certainly come out on top of this one. I do think Carr takes care of business at home, but it's going to be a challenge for them, certainly against Coach Hightower and company, the way that STM has come on down the stretch and kind of found their rhythm late. I don't know if you have anything more to add before you go start the rest of your Saturday, but again, appreciate your time as always.
Yeah, man. So again, like the way I kind of signed off a few weeks ago, like you have two choices, and when I say you, I mean everyone watching. On Friday of this week coming up, you can either go spend lots of money on things you don't need, or you can go watch high school football. And if I was you, the better investment is the latter. All right. The games are getting short, and I know not everybody can make the trip down to New Orleans in a few weeks. So if you've got a game in your area, you can go fight somebody over $5 off on something you don't need on Black Friday shopping, or you can go watch some really good high school football. And so, again, I have to encourage you to please go support these young men, these young women who are part of the support staffs and the spirit squads and the bands, and like all of these men and women, coaches, kids that put in so much time and effort. Like, y'all, this doesn't start in August. This starts in January. All right. And it is workouts. It is spring football. It is going through the incredibly awful Louisiana summer heat to get ready throughout the dog days. And it's a scrimmage, it's a jamboree, it's a 10-week season, and then for some teams it is 5 straight playoff games to earn their spot as champion. And so they deserve you to pay the $10 to go watch these games. All right, and so if you're not doing anything, even if you have plans, cancel them and go watch some high school football. These kids deserve the support of their communities, and you're in for a good time.
You can do all that shopping now online. So just wake up on
Right.
Friday whenever you wake up and eat your leftovers during the course of the day, get some shopping done on the laptop, spend some time with the family, catch a nap maybe, and then go catch some high school football on Friday. I don't know where I'm going to be yet, but I know I'll be somewhere. And regardless of which one of these matchups it is, I'm already looking forward to it because there's a couple dozen that I would love to be at if I could clone myself a few times. Chance, thanks again for your time, man. Again, he's Chance Hester from Louisiana Football Report. I'm Jerit Roser for Louisiana versus all y'all. Thank you all for tuning in at different points throughout this. And if any of y'all were here for the long haul, I don't know if 25th Dynasty or Spencer Verrett was here the whole time, but shout out you guys for getting involved in the comment section. And thanks to everyone, as always, for tuning in. Happy Thanksgiving to y'all, and looking forward to chatting more about it next week.